The year is 2027 and the Russian army is on the verge of defeat. Despite our initial success in Ukraine, the armies of Western Europe would band together to push us out of Ukraine and the Baltics. The entire garrison in Kaliningrad was destroyed, and soon afterwards, several major cities like St. Petersburg and Rostov would fall into NATO hands. We had no choice but to sign a conditional surrender, ending the European war as a NATO victory. In the aftermath, NATO and its allies would install a new puppet government in Belarus, occupy Belgorod, Crimea and Rostov, as well as removing our Black Sea coast by carving up the Caucasus into several new countries. But worse still, our country was in complete and total chaos. Medvedev would shamefully resign, leaving behind a power vacuum that would be exploited by none other than Prigozhin. As his mercenaries blitzed towards Moscow, we had to choose between driving forward to attack them or staying back to hold our defensive positions. Choosing the latter, the Prigozhin heresy would fail and Shoigu would retain control of the country. But he himself knew that the military had lost the trust of the Russian people, so he turned to a rather unorthodox figure. The National Front for Salvation would be formed and Dugin would be appointed as Premier of Russia. Soon afterwards, the federal system was discarded in favor of a new autocratic system under the ideology of Eurasianism. Also, the color of our country became darker, so you know we're the bad guys now. But in order to distract the Russian people from their diminishing freedoms and worsening living conditions, we united them against a common enemy, the NATO globalists. In the meantime, Dugin's popularity grew among the Russian people, and soon there were calls for him to lead Russia and finally avenge the humiliation from NATO. It was time for the philosopher to take the helm. As the new management took charge, we began to prepare for our holy war against the West. First up on the list was our economy. The free handouts to NATO for so-called war reparations would be stopped, and we would begin a campaign of subversive rearmament using JSC bills, that's what I meant. We would also strive for full economic autarky. After that, of course, we took Danziger War. Nah, just kidding. But I'm noticing some similarities between this and a certain Central European country in the 1930s. Of course, this was all part of Dugin's economic policy, also known as Duginomics. Sounds great, I love it. Hold on. This is why investing into not just the military but also the different areas of the civilian industry will be crucial for our plan. You lost me there. I'm sorry to say this guys, but it looks like Dugin has gone woke. Over in the Decisions tab, we have several options to increase the hatred and fanaticism of our people against the West, but it also showed an insight into Dugin's true desires. This is actually boring. All I want is to burn schoolbooks and stab cosmonauts. Me too, Dugin. Me too. Quick side note, anyone think that symbol looked familiar? Anyway, an event popped up out of nowhere telling me that we had developed literal super soldiers, and gave me the choice of using them or deeming them too inhumane. There is only one correct choice here. In the wise words of Chinese scientist Tian Kui-he, ethics is holding back scientific innovation and progress. After finishing up the economy tree, we went down the political tree, which was all about the Eurasian ideology. And to be honest, I wish I could explain everything about the ideology, but much like Rick and Morty in the Joe Rogan podcast, you need a triple-digit IQ to fully understand Eurasianism. Also, I'm not reading all of that. Yet again, Western imperialism was put on display as they brutally invaded a fellow anti-globalist, Gaddafi. I sent volunteers to them and they refused. Never mind, I fully agree with NATO here. After several years of industrial and military buildup, it was time to look outwards. We announced to the world that the Eurasian people would bow no longer and made our intentions very clear. Out of nowhere, the French suddenly had the audacity to demand more war reparations from me.
Man, shut your bitch ass up!
Unfortunately, there wasn't an option to tell the French that we had the money and just refuse to give it to them of all people. Getting back on track, we turned our gaze to Central Asia. After all, it was time to put the Asia into Eurasia, and we did so by invading them. While that was going on, we prepared to retake the Caucasus and destroy several of the illegitimate regimes set up by NATO. We annexed the North Caucasus Republic and moved our army into the Don Republic and Kalmykia. Regrettably, the Kuban Republic would be under the protection of NATO, but we'll burn that bridge when we get there. Once Central Asia was mopped up and most of the Caucasus was secured, we declared the Eurasian state. Truly, the last days of Europe were coming. By now, there was only one enemy left for us to face: NATO, which by this point was pretty much all of Europe. As our armies redeployed to the border, now is the time to explain our grand plan. Firstly, our industry and manpower is nothing compared to NATO, meaning that if the war dragged on for too long, the West would eventually outproduce us and push us back. We had to destroy as many NATO units as possible in the first few weeks of the war to have any chance of winning. In order to do this, our Air Force was sent to strike NATO logistics as well as providing air support in the critical first weeks. The battle plans had been prepared, and the front was roughly split into three sections, with the northern front at Belarus and the Baltics, the central front at Ukraine, as well as the Caucasus front where we were ready to crush the Kuban Republic before the arrival of NATO reinforcements. In the days leading up to our grand showdown with the West, our partisans rose up all across the occupied territories, causing chaos behind the front line and allowing us to strike, which we would by declaring war on NATO on the 10th of June 2033. Immediately, we launched an offensive in the Baltics, catching the small NATO force there completely off guard. We were able to steamroll through Latvia and Estonia, most of Lithuania, retake Kaliningrad, and even seize a few areas in Poland, all within less than 3 weeks. Our blitzkrieg continued in the south as we brute forced our way across the Kerch Strait and into Crimea after capitulating the Kuban Republic. Seizing the Crimean Peninsula would allow us to bypass the main NATO front line in eastern Ukraine and strike into the rear, potentially encircling the entire NATO force, but you'll see that in a minute. We spread out from Crimea and established a beachhead while trying to link up with our spearhead coming from the east. At the same time, we kept up the pressure in northern Ukraine, attacking the disorganized units until we touched tips and closed the encirclement of more than 50 units in the Donbass. Once the pocket was liquidated, NATO's casualties jumped up by 500,000, but it wasn't over just yet, as we followed up with another devastating encirclement of more than 40 divisions in the south. With almost 1 million NATO troops taken out of action in a matter of weeks, we advanced until we eventually ran out of supply. Probably because we bombed all of it. For a few weeks, the front line was completely stagnant and it looked as if our advantage had run out, but we finally made a break when we crossed the river and made it to Odessa, opening the path to the Balkans. Gerasimov's army would move in to exploit the gap, capturing parts of Romania and Bulgaria near the Black Sea before the front line solidified again. Even though we encircled like 50 units in Moldova, the front line was still too stacked to continue pushing. Now, it might look as if NATO completely foiled our offensive in the Balkans, but this was actually a Maskirovka tactic to make NATO pull units off the northern front line. We activated our battle plan in the north and quickly broke through, cutting off a massive salient in Lithuania and making several other smaller pockets, pretty much disintegrating the front line here. We capitulated Belarus, which had the worst terrain to fight in by far, and it was smooth sailing from here as there was only plains to the west. Our tanks had already reached the German border and nearly captured the city of Berlin itself. Unfortunately, we were forced back to the city's outskirts, but not before leaving a present. For this heinous act of mass destruction, Dugin would surely have been tried at The Hague, but as the famous Serbian patriotic song goes, anyway, we nearly cut off the entirety of Ukraine from the rest of NATO, but unfortunately they would capitulate, robbing us of the chance to make the biggest encirclement of this run. By now, even the non-credible defense subreddit would have to admit that the war hadn't necessarily developed to NATO's advantage. But we weren't stopping until we reached the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, so onwards we went. The effects of several consecutive months of constant encirclements was beginning to show as our advance in Western Europe was much faster than the slog of the East. Most of France would fall in a matter of weeks, followed by Germany. But after spending most of the war on their island, the Brits would finally send their elite special forces to turn the tides of the war.
I'm doing my part too!
With two of NATO's biggest contributors pretty much gutted out, it didn't take much to finish off the rest, so we just battle planned to victory. Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Greece would be finished off, leaving no resistance in mainland Europe. And for the first time in like 13 years, the Russian Navy would finally leave port and patrol the English Channel for our naval invasion. The Brits could have really put up a better fight than this. But once it was done, the Norwegians were dealt with as well. With the fall of Norway in 2035, Dugin would finally proclaim victory over the West. Eurasia had won. Well, that marks the end of the playthrough and of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I haven't uploaded a single video in the past month, honestly cause I was slacking off, but there is much more to come. Anyway, see ya.